The book of Exodus begins by reminding us that it's been a long time since Joseph and his coat. Joseph brought his family to Egypt, but they all died there. But the people that came from that family were fruitful. They multiplied. And the book of Exodus begins by saying that the Israelites filled the land. A new king came into power in Egypt, to whom the name of Joseph means nothing. And he sees the size of the Israelite population, and he feels threatened. And he imagines, well, they may organize, they may rebel, they may leave, and that would leave Egypt without a workforce. So the new king of Egypt makes them all slaves, and he makes them build his cities and forces the Hebrews to do this under harsh and brutal conditions. Furthermore, to stop the multiplication of the Hebrews, the king speaks to the Hebrew midwives and tells them to kill any male Hebrew babies that are born. Eventually, this is a decree that everyone is informed of. No more Hebrew male babies are to live. And this sets up the story of the birth of Moses. Anyone here make little baskets of woven paper in Sunday school or vacation Bible school when you were a child? Like Noah and the ark? Like parts of the Joseph story. This is a violent story. A royal governmental decree to kill infants. The term Hebrew refers to a people who were descended from Shem, who was Noah's son. And the designation Hebrew comes from actually the name of Shem's great-grandson, who was Eber. Hebrew and Eber, that's where it comes from. Later we read Abram was a Hebrew. There was Abraham, there was Isaac, and then there was Jacob, who was renamed by the Lord Israel. Jacob became Israel. So the Hebrew people came to be known as the nation called Israel after Jacob. Well, we are told that a Levite man and a Levite woman got married, and they had a baby. It was a boy. They are Hebrew. They are aware that Hebrew male infants are in danger. The mother hides the child, but unable to hide him any longer. After 3 months, she places him in a basket that's made of papyrus and pitch and tar, and she places that basket amongst the reeds in the river. The baby boy's sister, older sister, is standing at a distance, and she's watching to see what will happen. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river to bathe and finds this basket with the baby. She sees it is a Hebrew boy. The sister asks Pharaoh's daughter if she wants to go find a Hebrew nurse to nurse the child. And Pharaoh's daughter says yes, and the sister goes and finds the child's mother, who ends up getting paid to nurse her own son. Note this child does not have a name yet. It's just the infant. When the child grows older, the Levite woman brings the child back to Pharaoh's daughter, who takes him and names him Moses. The name Moses sounds like the Hebrew word which means to draw out. The name can also be related to a common Egyptian name for son, but it probably means to draw out. Now notice how women play such a prominent role in the birth and the deliverance of Moses. Not the least of which are 2 Hebrew midwives, and they are named Shiphrah and Puah. And this is unusual in a story where very few people are named. Notice that very few people are named. Not even the pharaohs are named in the book of Exodus. And the king commands these 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to let the Hebrew girl infants live, but if it's a boy, they are to kill them. And we read this: the midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Twice we are told that these women feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. Fearing God is a major theme throughout the Bible. It's particularly prominent in the book of Proverbs, where it is mentioned 18 different times. For example, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." It says, "Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Turn away from evil." In Isaiah, the Lord tells Israel to fear the Lord more than humans. Jesus speaks of fearing God more than humans. The fear of the Lord also is prominent in the book of Psalms, in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the book of Job. What does it mean to fear the Lord? It doesn't mean to be scared or terrified of God. It means to stand in awe of God, to reverently honor and respect who God is. Fear in this context is not a negative thing, but a positive one. When we fear the Lord, it doesn't mean we cower in terror like God is going to hit us over the head with a bunch of bad things, particularly when we do wrong. No, it means we revere Him for who He is. When I was growing up, I feared my father and my mother. Not because they were mean and vicious people. They weren't. They were loving. They were nurturing. But I respected their authority. I respected their place. And I also knew what would happen if I got out of line, which I never did, but I knew what would happen if I did. I did fear causing them grief or disappointment. It was a fear of love. Think of fire. We use it to light candles. We have fireplaces. We burn things. We use it in our homes. We get near fire when it's cold, but we also know its power. We don't play with it carelessly, do we? Think of the ocean. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's something to be enjoyed, but the ocean is also fierce. Warnings are posted about the swells and the currents and what could happen if someone foolishly ignores the power and the ways of the ocean. You have to fear the ocean in the sense that you also respect it even as you enjoy it. These two Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, fear God more than powerful Pharaoh. And when we fear God more than anything else, the result is courageous faith. And that's what they show. When we tell the stories of God, the stories of faith and courage and prayer and salvation, let's remember Shiphrah and Puah. Are they not worth some attention? They put their lives on the line in these acts of civil disobedience, and they play an early, although largely unknown part in the deliverance of Israel. We think of Moses, yes, but if it wasn't for these two women, no Moses. Shiphrah and Puah are not leaders in their community. They have no influence over governmental policy, but they are not powerless. God is able to use persons of faith, even from smaller stations in life, to accomplish what He wants. And there is no indication that what they did ever really becomes public. Although perhaps it was hidden knowledge in many of the Hebrew circles, somehow their courageous and life-giving deeds did become known and are included in this writing of Exodus. There's a biblical scholar, her name is Stacy M. Floyd Thomas, and she sees their actions as acts of what she calls liberating motherhood, these women. And their first act of liberating motherhood began when Shiphrah and Puah refused to carry out Pharaoh's order to murder Hebrew boys. And then she says that covering and the shielding of the infant Moses by his mother, that was an outlaw act against Pharaoh's rulings. That was the second act of liberating motherhood. And then Moses' sister, how she strategically improvised Moses' care That's that third act of liberating motherhood. And then the decisive actions of Pharaoh's daughter that brought the reunion of Moses with his mother. That was that last act of liberating motherhood. And she says these three classic acts reveal that it takes a village of mothers and mothering to raise a child in a civilization. Women are strong in these opening parts of Exodus. And we're told that God blessed these Hebrew midwives with families because they honored him. Interesting that the Egyptians fear the Israelites, and it eventually leads to their failure. These women fear God, and it eventually leads to their success. And do you see the providence of God? The providence of God already at work in Moses' life. Pharaoh's daughter has pity on the Hebrew boy, unlike her father, who wants to put them all to death. And then look at all the ironies in this story. Just amazing. Pharaoh chooses the river to destroy, right? Throw him in the Nile. And yet, it is the very river that saves Moses. Daughters are the ones who are allowed to live, and it's the daughters in this story who become the very ones who thwart Pharaoh's plans. Members of Pharaoh's own family undermined his policies, and they end up saving the very person who will rise and eventually deliver the Hebrews out of Egyptian slavery. Pharaoh's daughter, Egyptian royalty, listens to the advice of this simple Hebrew girl. The mother of the baby gets paid to do what she wants to do, and the money comes from Pharaoh's own budget. Moses is educated to be an Israelite leader within the courts of Pharaoh eventually. Everything is happening right under Pharaoh's nose. Pharaoh's daughter names the baby Moses, which means to draw out. And this is also what Moses is going to do for Israel. He will draw them out of the oppression that they face in Egypt. Throughout all of this, God uses what might be seen as weak and foolish to shame the strong and the wise. And we're reminded of Paul's words that he will write centuries later in 1 Corinthians when he said, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things to nullify the things that are. God often uses what seems low to do mighty things. God isn't mentioned all that much in these opening verses. But he's in the background. He's unseen, like in the story of Joseph. God is working his plan. He is even working through Egyptians who don't know the God of Israel. But he appears big, kind of makes his grand entrance at the end of chapter 2 when it says that the Israelites groaned in their slavery and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God, and God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob. And so God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. One Bible reads, and God knew. Oh, God knew what was happening. The cry from the Israelites kind of grabs the Lord's heart. It's this cry that formally brings him into the events. Do we ever groan? Do we ever cry over some hurt in our lives that just really burdens us? And we wonder where God is. Apparently God hears. He's not unaware of the abuse and of the violence that his people go through. He may seem distant, but he is nearer than we know. And it says God remembered that covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God promised Abraham he'd be a blessing to many nations. He told Abraham, your descendants are going to be like the stars in the sky. If the Hebrews come to an end under the Egyptian madness, this covenant is done. But God knew, and he remembered. And that's what launches the Lord's salvation work for Israel that happens in the rest of the book of Exodus. The old preacher and Bible commentator Matthew Henry said that we should pay attention to God's providence. Just at the time when Pharaoh's cruelty rose to its height by ordering the Hebrew children to be drowned, it was right then that the deliverer was born. And so when people are contriving the ruin of the church, God is preparing for its salvation. Remember that even though a culture may follow the ways of death, God is always bringing life. And though people may cause great destruction, God cannot be stopped. I am sure no one thought God was working when Pharaoh was practicing his genocidal mayhem against Hebrew male infants, nor did anyone imagine God was at work when the slavery became all the harsher for the Hebrews. And what God does with delivering Israel won't come easily. It's not without its problems. It's not without its obstacles. Just because God hears doesn't mean everything's going to become smooth. Didn't happen that way for Jesus. But when God acts, he will make a way. And in many ways, Moses anticipates and points to what the Father does in Jesus. God showed his bent toward redemption in saving the baby Moses. And that redemption continues in Exodus as Moses brings the people to freedom. God's redemption continues through the ups and downs, the rocky life of Israel throughout the Old Testament. And it comes to fruition in Jesus. For there was another infant who was targeted by a raging leader who decreed a senseless murder of many children. And he was saved as a baby, not by some miracle of God, but from the actions of people of faith and courage, not the least of which were his parents. And he led us out of slavery into the freedom of grace. God came right down into the violence of this world in the person of Jesus, and he made himself vulnerable, becoming like us. You know, when Jesus first took that bread and that cup in that room with his disciples, they were having the Passover meal. You know where that came from? Moses and the freedom of the Hebrews when they were brought out of Egypt. That Passover was given to Moses and Israel to remember what God had done to save them. Moses' life will lead to the Passover. Jesus took it and made it about his death and his resurrection. And here we honor what the Lord has done for us. In the birth of Moses, we see the hand of God. And that same God is working in your life, and he is working in my life. He has freed us, he has led us, he has spoken to us, and he has saved us in his one and only Son, Jesus Christ. That is what we give thanks for at this table. Let's pray. God, thank you that even the worst of earthly powers cannot outdo your working of life. We look to you and we ask that we would be able to trust you in all the circumstances of our lives. Thank you for how you used Moses. Thank you for how you brought Jesus. We stand on him. Amen.